हेलो फ्रेंड्स, केजी क्लासेस में आपका स्वागत है। आज हम आपको अलेक्जेंडर पॉप के लॉन्ग आंसर के बारे में बताएंगे। क्वेश्चन है क्रिटिकली एवेल्युएट द पोएटिक अचीवमेंट ऑफ पॉप। आंसर: पॉप हैड बीन टोल्ड बाय वाल्स टू बी ए करेक्ट पोएम एंड सच he became, including his very first publications. Everything he wrote in verse was invariably to use a homely but expressive phrases, excellent as far as it went. The pastorals, the Messiah's Windsor Forest continue to give the pleasure which finished copies of verse can never fail to afford to an educated ear. Elisa to Alvard Abelard is only a feeble duplicate of Dryden. His share in Grace Force is not to be included in any summary of a serious performance. For epic poetry he lacked the historic sense. Had he ever ventured upon an attempt in this direction, it would have been a slavish imagination of the ancients such as they appeared to his eyes. A plan for an epic on Brutus, the mythical grandson of Aeneas, was found among his papers after his death. There remains a didactic poetry in both its direct and indirect form. The poetry which has for its expresses object the inculcation of principles and which must be primarily judged according to its success in teaching the lesson which it intends to convey. The essay on criticism is a series of detached percept, not the development of a complete system apart from its marvelous finish. As a juvenile effort, it succeeds in enforcing many truths in a form which the incisiveness has rarely been surpassed. For the development of a philosophical system such as that propounded in the essay on man, Pope was imperfectly qualified because in lessening simple words he was no philosopher, but there again he succeeded by his mastery of form in impressing upon the mind many of the percepts incidental to his system and produces a string of poetic proverbs which will serve for many a future text. Pope's satirical poetry is also didactic in its aim. It has a positive purpose. It contrasts excellence and virtue with dullness and vice, and its examples are illustrations of its percepts. Here Pope is master. His ability in representing types of character is unsurpassed. Personal spleen may have generally suggested their selection, but this fact fails to interfere with the triumphant success of the result. The men and women of his satires and epistle, his Atticus and Atossa and Sophia and Sporus are real types, whether they be more or less faithful portraits of Addison and the old Duchess, of Lady Mary and Lord Hervey. His duns are the duns of all times. His orator Henley, the mob orator, and his awful Aristarch, the dun of all epochs, thought there may have been some merit in Theobald, some use even in Henley, and though in Bentley there was undoubted greatness, but in Pope's hands individuals become types, and his creative power in this respect surpasses that of the Roman satirist and leave Dryden himself behind. फ्रेंड्स, मेरी लैंग्वेज को मत देखो, ये क्या है इसकी मतलब कुछ समझो. Pope's fame as a translator was ranked by Addison on a level with that of Dryden, but even Addison can in this case be hardly admitted as a competent judge. If the art of translation consists not in carrying into an author the characteristics of the translator and his age, but in reproduction at all events of the leading characteristics of that author himself, Pope's Homer must be accounted a failure. It is a noble achievement as an English poem, but it resembles those efforts in landscape gardening which require to be surveyed from particular points of view, unless their artificiality is to betray itself at once. Pope has not caught. He could not catch the manner of Homer. Had he succeeded in this, he might be forgiven a thousand inaccuracies more glaring than those which he has actually committed. A scholar hand might make Dryden's juvenile Pope's translation need not to be revised but recast. This is not mere questions of meter. Garrick bore a big in Macbeth, but he moved the passions of his audience, hit the spirit of Shakespeare. Pope had not caught that Homeric spirit which has communicated itself to at least one later translator, even when imprisoned by his own willfulness in the machinery of a modern stanza. Of his poetic form, Pope was master. He perfected an English meter, the heroic couplet, which for the purposes of didactic and satirical poetry has since remained the chosen vehicle of expression in our language. To his command over this meter he had attained rapidly, though not at once. His earlier poems are not free from false rhymes and display that free introduction of an Alexandrine line which Cowley had first among English poets permitted himself, but which Pope afterwards abandoned. Whether Pope could have attained to equal mastery over other meter seems an ideal question, for none could have equally suited the peculiarity of his genius. Lady Mary was of the opinion that Pope must have felt in blank verse, just as Dryden declared that Milton would have written Paradise Lost in rhymed couplet if he could. The clear conception of a thought was in each case his first step. Next came the indefatigable labor of condensing and compressing it into the form in which its expression most finished in forms. It is at the same time most convenient to the memory. Thus he as it were engraved ideas, and his poems are full of those couplets which can clearly and without damage to themselves be taken out of their setting in versification, Pope was, as he often said, pupil of Dryden, but he far surpassed his master. Dryden's verse is often slovenly and abounds in weak lines. In Pope there is never a syllable, hardly ever a line too much. On the other hand, Pope might, with disadvantage to the effect of his poem as a whole, have departed from the ordinary rule as to the listening to a page of Pope. An entire poem is apt to vary by the regularity of cadence, resembling the march past of column after column of perfectly drilled troops. It would be difficult to point out any other defect in Pope's versification to this day, except in a few instances where the pronunciation of diphthong or the attenuation of a word has changed it. It remains a classical model, and Johnson was guilty of no Byronic extravagance when he told Boswell that a thousand years may elapse before there shall appear another man with a power of versification equal to that of Pope. Such were the principal achievements of Pope during the life of devotion to literature, but English literature owes him more than these. He owes him the effects of that devotion itself. It was not only that he made war upon those who degraded an art into a trade, and into the vilest of trades. The infirmity of his temper, which charity will judge with gentleness in consideration of the miserable frailty of his bodily health, led him into my self-degradation. But the master passion in his breast was not his vanity, it was his veneration for what is small and mean and noxious. He could not exterminate Grub Street, but as long as he lived and battled against it, is felt that it was only Grub Street, and the world around was conscious of the fact. He served literature neither for power like Swift, nor like nearly all his contemporaries for place and play, not even for fame chiefly, but for her own sake, and the acknowledgment due to a novel and lifelong self-devotion should not be grudged to Pope even by those who perceive his shortcomings and lament his faults. So Pope is truly a poet. If not in him, where is poetry to be found? Lowell rightly remarks, as truly as Shakespeare is the poet of man, God made him dealing with great passions and innate motives, so truly is the Pope the poet of society, the delineator of manners, the exposer of those motives which may be called acquired, whose spring is in habit and institutions of purely worldly origin. Gosse says it is a fact that Pope has no romance, no spirituality, no mystery, and of highest region of poetry he never had so much as dreamed of. But in the lower provinces there is perhaps no single writer who Sowers find things about him with such a prodigality guilty of wit or dazzle, used so much by the mere exercise of his intelligence. Next question है, write a note on treatment of fair sex. Answer: the rape of the lock is meant to laugh at the little unguarded follies of the female sex. The artificial tone of the age, the frivolous aspect of enmity is nowhere more exquisitely pictured than in this poem. It defines Pope's attitude to the fair sex. Pope's attitude towards women is satirical and ironical. Such an attitude was a product of his personal experience, but it was also conditioned by the society of his time. We know how Pope was laughed at by Lady Mary Wortley Montagu when he declared his love for her. There was, however, only lady named Martha Blount who smiled to make him gay, and in this affair too there was a lot of scandal which Pope had to face. Moreover, the poet was of a touchy and suspicious nature and thus disqualified for domestic tranquility. His physical infirmities prevented him from displaying his emotional power. Hence, in spite of his friendship Miss Blount, he never fully gained the most essential condition of all human happiness, that is marriage. Apart from his personal experience, the social condition also shaped in his mind a low estimate of the contemporary woman. Such an attitude was not peculiarly and singularly his own. Estimates of Addison, Young, and Lord Chesterfield also show the same contemptible attitude towards women. The ladies of fashion in his times lived a artificial life and behaved in a manner as if they were hunters to attract and ensure men. Their mornings were spent in the adoration of the cosmetic dovers, their evening in tea parties and the game of ombre, and their nights in the balls and masquerades. The women of fashion were what Dr. Johnson calls unaided girls. Belinda's sprightly mind as unfixed as her eyes, which shine on all alike. Women's hearts are referred to as moving toy shops. Their daily routine consisted of trifling things. There was no place for earthly things of use. They slept till noon when they were awakened by their lapdogs. Then they decorated themselves for the day with India's jam and Arabia's perfume. Pope's attitude towards Belinda is his attitude towards every woman of fashionable society of his day. Visits were an essential part of the day's routine for a fashionable woman. The visits were paid in the evening on appointed days or on occasions of marriage or mourning. Or the small pillow grace a lady bed, while visits shall be paid on solemn days when numerous wax lights in bright order blaze, while nymphs take treats or assignation give. Here Pope criticized fashionable ladies' intention of extracting every drop of pleasure from life, consented to be entertained by their suitors or else agreed to meet them at appointed time and place. Ladies pretended to be ill and received visitors in their apartments, apparently for sympathy but in reality for displaying their new night gown or blooming beauty. Pope perhaps did not like all this. All these fashions and frivolities made him critical of women. All these fashions badly tempered his view, and he wrote on the rich quilt sinks with becoming bow wrapped in a gown for sickness and for so the fair ones feel such melodies as these when each new night dress gives a new disease. Pope had a genius for describing feminine weaknesses. Leslie Stephens says that Pope's contemptuous treatment of women has a keener edge than that of Addison. This feeling of contempt on the part of Pope is also to be evidenced in the gallery of malicious portraits in his second epistle of the characters of women, where he remarks that women are a compound of matter too soft a lasting mask to bear, and best distinguished by black, brown, fair, and that every woman is at heart a wreck. The same estimate is drawn in the passage given below from the Rape of the Lock. Whether the nymph shall break Diana's law, or some frail china jar receives a flaw, or stain her honor, or her new brocade forget her praise, or miss a masquerade, or loss in her or necklace at a ball, or whether heaven had doomed that a shock must fall. The occupations mentioned in the lines were the chief occupations of women in Pope's opinion, which was but a result of social observation. The essence of fair sex, according to Pope, lay in dressing well, in looking well, and in adoring well. He has been taken to task by some critics like Alvin Wordsworth and Taine for the gross licentiousness of the lines like or stain her honor or her new brocade. The critics are offended by the beastishness of Pope's laughter and his mocking attitude towards an elegant and beautiful woman of fashion in particular, and towards whole fair sex in general. Is there no charming grace in the prat and frivolity of a pretty woman then that Pope shows? Asked Mr. Taine. Mark Pattison, on the contrary, has defended Pope from these charges. In his opinion, the attacks he made on women were not the poet's crisis. Here he is but the representative of his age. We have seen what a poor opinion Pope has of the female sex in his dedication to the Rape of the Lock. Pope, with unconscious impertinence, insult his heroine for her presumable ignorance of critical jargon. Nevertheless, if we read the whole preface as well as his letter to Lady Mary, we will find chivalrous devotion on the part of Pope and a gallant tone of address. The combination of the form of chivalrous devotion to women with the reality of cynical contempt was the peculiar tone of manners which came in the court at the time of the Restoration and gradually spread downward through the lower strata in English literature. The Rape of the Lock gives the most finished representation of the sentiment. Thanks, best of luck.